Here's a fact that should unsettle you. In a controlled study, researchers subjected people to two experiences back-to-back: physical pain and the memory of a romantic rejection. They measured the neural response to both. The brain's pain circuits fired identically, not similarly or in a related region. The same circuits, the same intensity, the same alarm. This means that the next time someone tells you to, just get over it, they're essentially telling someone with a broken arm to stop being dramatic. But what's even stranger than the pain itself is this: your IQ drops after rejection, measurably. In controlled settings, people who had just experienced social exclusion scored significantly lower on cognitive tests. Decision-making worsened. Impulse control weakened. Rejection doesn't just hurt you, it temporarily makes you less intelligent. And because you're cognitively compromised at exactly the moment you most need to think clearly, you do things you later regret. You send the message. You say the thing. You decide the wound instead of from your true self. This video explains what actually happens inside you when rejection hits: the neuroscience, the evolutionary wiring, the psychological patterns that form around it, and what it takes to stop letting it control your life. Not the superficial version, the real version. In 2011, Ethan Kross and his team at the University of Michigan recruited people who had recently gone through an unwanted breakup, not months ago, but very recently and still raw, and placed them inside a brain scanner. They showed each person a photograph of the person who had rejected them. The somatosensory cortex lit up. This is the part of the brain that processes physical pain, like burning your hand or breaking your wrist. It's not a metaphorical region. It's not an emotional center. It's the area that detects tissue damage and sends the signal: something is wrong with your body. It activated when viewing a photograph. Kross's interpretation was straightforward. Social pain and physical pain are not just emotionally similar. They are neurologically the same event. The brain processes both through the same alarm system. Then they took it further. They asked the participants to simply think about the rejection, not look at the photo again, just recall the memory. The circuits activated once more. Here's what that means. Most physical pain requires a live stimulus to keep hurting. Pull out the splinter, and the pain stops. But rejection pain has no splinter to pull. It's the memory that reignites it. Every replay feels like a new wound, and you will replay it. That's not a choice. That's the brain doing what it does when it detects a threat, running the data repeatedly, trying to find the error, trying to understand what happened so it can prevent it from happening again. The brain isn't being cruel when it does this. It's just a very dedicated, very imprecise threat detection machine. The issue lies in what it concludes. The replay isn't neutral processing. You lie there, and you run the scene, the exact words, the exact pause before they said it, the specific quality of the silence that followed. And your brain is not just reviewing, it's building a case. And the brain isn't a fair prosecutor. It doesn't weigh evidence evenly. It catastrophizes. It zooms in on the most painful interpretation and presents it as the most probable truth. Not because it wants to hurt you, because worst-case preparation is what kept your ancestors breathing. So the brain fills in the blanks like this: they rejected me because there's something fundamentally wrong with me. That's not a conclusion. That's a survival guess dressed up as a verdict. Here's the harder truth this script won't let you skip. Sometimes the brain's worst-case interpretation contains a grain of something real. Sometimes there was a genuine mismatch, a real mistake, a thing you actually did that contributed to the outcome. The instinct to dismiss the brain's verdict entirely. It's just anxiety. It's just old wiring. None of it is true. Can be its own kind of avoidance. The work isn't to silence the verdict. It's to interrogate it. To separate what's accurate from what's amplified. To ask, which part of this is information, and which part is the brain's ancient habit of assuming the worst, because both exist, and conflating them. Treating everything the pain says as false leaves you as blind as treating everything it says as true. Your brain isn't designed for your comfort. It's built to keep you alive in conditions that no longer exist. Throughout most of human history, belonging to a group wasn't just a preference. It was essential for survival. You couldn't hunt, defend yourself, survive winter, or raise children alone. The group was like oxygen. Being cast out was a death sentence, literally exposure, starvation, predation. So, the brain developed an alarm system tuned to that reality. Social rejection had to hurt as much as a physical wound because it was equally dangerous. The urgency had to match. The need to repair the rupture and return to safety had to be immediate. That wiring exists in everyone watching this now. The world has changed, but that wiring has not. Getting rejected for a job won't leave you starving in the cold this week. Being turned down by someone you love won't expose you to predators tonight. But the alarm doesn't know that. It fires for the same reason it always did. Disconnection detected. Survival at risk. Act now. Cortisol spikes. Attention narrows. The body reacts as if there's a threat. In a tribe on a savanna, that response made sense. In modern life, it impairs thinking and leads to impulsive behaviors that make rejection more damaging than rejection itself. You're running 50,000-year-old emergency software on a problem that doesn't need urgent action, and the software can't tell the difference. The first wound is rejection. The second wound is how you interpret it. The second wound is often worse because it doesn't fade when the event does. It hardens. Researcher June Price Tangney spent decades studying shame and guilt, what separates people who process rejection and move on from those who get reorganized by it. The difference isn't resilience in the usual sense. It's not about being stronger or tougher. It's about whether the pain is linked to an event or an identity. I wasn't what they needed is an event, a limited data point that tells you about fit, timing, or circumstance. I am not enough is an identity, a permanent label or judgment about everything, based on just one data point. When under threat, the brain doesn't naturally choose the first frame. It often picks the second, because an identity-level conclusion feels safer. If the problem is me, then I can stay alert, expect it, and try to protect myself. An identity threat is frightening, but it's predictable. Here's where it gets really tough. When rejection occurs, the brain doesn't see it in isolation. It searches its quiet archive. Every past rejection, every moment you felt invisible, or unwanted, or not quite enough. It pulls them all into the present and stacks them into evidence. Suddenly, this isn't just one rejection. It's proof of something the brain has suspected for a long time. That's why people can spiral for months over what seems like a small event from the outside. It's not about how big the rejection is. It's about what it's filed as proof of. Some people experience rejection differently than others. This isn't a sign of character weakness. It comes from a nervous system that was conditioned early in life. If you grew up in an environment where love or approval was conditional, where it was withdrawn when you misbehaved, when a parent was stressed or without clear reason, your nervous system learned a crucial skill: constant environmental scanning. Watch the face. Monitor the tone. Track the silence. Be ready. As a child, that was a smart adaptation. Reading the emotional temperature of the room and adjusting accordingly was how you met your needs. It was intelligent. It was survival. The problem is that this skill doesn't automatically turn off. The nervous system that learned to scan your household continues to do so. In friendships, workplaces, romantic relationships, or casual hallway interactions. Someone takes longer than usual to reply to your message, and your stomach drops. A colleague seems slightly distracted during a conversation with you, and you spend the next hour cataloging everything you might have said wrong. An email comes back with a cooler tone than usual, and you read it 4 times, searching for what it means about you. That's not paranoia. That's a nervous system doing exactly what it was trained to do, treating ambiguity as a probable threat, because in the environment where it formed, ambiguity often was a danger. The hard part: this trained response creates its own consequences. A person who continuously scans for signs of rejection will sometimes interpret neutral signals as rejection. They might even cause rejection through withdrawal or overcorrection prompted by their scanning. The behavior shaped by the fear of rejection can, in some relationships, cause the very rejection it seeks to avoid. It's not a character flaw. It's a loop. And recognizing it as a loop is the first step to breaking free from it. Getting back to the topic of cognitive research, because this part matters more than most realize. Case Western Reserve University conducted a series of studies on how social exclusion affects executive function. Participants who experienced rejection scored lower on IQ tests administered immediately afterward. Their analytical ability declined, and impulse control weakened. Think about what that looks like in the moments that really matter. You get rejected by someone you love, and now cognitively compromised, with your nervous system in threat response. You have to decide what to do next. Whether to reach out, what to say, how to behave. You're making those decisions with clearly impaired judgment. That's why you end up sending the message you promised yourself you wouldn't. That's why you say something to a colleague that you immediately regret. And that's why someone passed over for a promotion becomes cold and withdrawn, making their next review even worse. The brain under rejection threat has three main modes. It freezes, becomes quiet, withdraws, goes numb. It fights, gets angry, lashes out, often at people tangentially involved in the wound, or it fawns, becomes overly agreeable, self-abandoning, shrinking to avoid more rejection. None of these help you, and all three can lead to more rejection. Withdrawal makes you look disengaged. Aggression pushes others away. Fawning, the hardest behavior to recognize in yourself, gradually erodes both others' respect for you and your own self-respect, quietly over time. Rejection triggers these behaviors. These behaviors, in turn, cause more rejection. The cycle keeps repeating itself. This is what rejection is, just part of life. Deal with it. Fails to explain. Without understanding what's happening, you're not just managing the pain of one rejection. You're trapped in a loop that repeats itself, often unseen while it runs. Let's be precise about something. Understanding the neuroscience of rejection doesn't make it stop hurting. This isn't that kind of video. Anyone promising that understanding your brain will eliminate pain is selling you something. What changes is your relationship to the pain, and that relationship determines whether you make decisions from within it or from a steadier place. The first tool, name it accurately. Not, I got rejected because I'm not enough. Instead, recognize, my brain activated its threat system. I'm experiencing social pain, which registers neurologically the same as physical pain. My cognition is temporarily impaired. I shouldn't make important decisions right now. This sounds clinical. That's the point. UCLA researcher Matthew Lieberman showed that labeling an emotional experience with precise language reduces amygdala activity, the brain's alarm center, in real time. You're not suppressing the emotion. You're giving the prefrontal cortex enough information to start regulating the limbic response. You can't think your way out of the pain, but you can stop the pain from controlling your thoughts. The second tool, interrupt the replay with engagement, not distraction. Replay isn't processing, it's amplifying. The brain loops because it hasn't finished its threat analysis. It keeps running the same data because it hasn't found an answer that satisfies. Passive distraction, watching something or scrolling, doesn't complete the loop, it just delays it. What interrupts it? Physical movement, which research shows reduces the neural pain response to rejection. Writing, specifically examining what happened, what you know versus what you assume, and speaking it aloud to someone you trust, which externalizes internal thoughts and exposes distortions, are effective. The goal is to give the brain a completion, not a detour. The third tool, separate the data from the verdict. The brain presents its worst-case interpretation as the most probable truth, but it's not. Ask, what are all the possible explanations for this outcome? Not to dismiss the pain or gaslight yourself into optimism, rather, to force your brain to consider multiple variables. Then ask a deeper question. Which parts of this interpretation might be accurate? And what exactly do I need to do about those parts? Rejection rarely belongs entirely to one person. People reject others because of their own fears, wounds, timing, and history. That doesn't erase your pain or your contribution, if any. It just lifts the burden of a final judgment. The fourth tool, recalibrate through exposure. Avoidance keeps the threat system constantly on high alert. The nervous system learns safety through experience, not protection. Jia Jiang spent 100 consecutive days deliberately seeking rejection, making outrageous requests of strangers to practice hearing no. A little-known detail. On day 3, he asked a Krispy Kreme employee to make donuts in the shape of the Olympic rings, expecting to be turned down. The employee made them. On day 36, he asked a stranger if he could play soccer in their backyard. The stranger said yes and joined the game. Jiang's discovery wasn't that rejection stopped hurting. It was that the anticipatory dread, the fear of rejection that quietly governed his decisions, collapsed. He stopped building his life around avoidance. You don't need to do 100 days, but voluntarily entering low-stakes situations where rejection is possible and walking out intact is how you teach your nervous system that rejection is survivable. That recalibration takes time. It requires repetition, but it's the only way to change your baseline truly. The fifth tool, connection, not just self-work. All the tools above are individual, but research on recovering from social rejection makes it clear. The fastest, most lasting recalibration of the rejection system happens through genuine connection with others. Not reassurance seeking, or having someone tell you that the person who rejected you was wrong, but a real, reciprocal connection, the experience of being known and present with another person, that directly counteracts the neurological threat signal triggered by rejection. The nervous system that learned to expect disconnection learns safety through repeated experiences of connection. And that can't happen solely inside your own head. A single rejection is tough. Chronic rejection repeated over years, especially during childhood, does something different. It doesn't just cause pain, it changes you. When rejection signals fire repeatedly, the nervous system stops treating them as isolated events and begins to see them as normal, the expected condition, the default state. Over time, the person stops asking, "Why did this happen?" and starts believing that this is just what happens to them. That belief becomes part of their identity, and identity isn't challenged, it's defended. Even when the identity is painful, people cling to it because it feels familiar. The nervous system perceives familiarity as safety, even when it's the source of the wound. The certainty of a painful outcome seems less threatening than the uncertainty of something different. That's why some people stay in relationships where they're undervalued, in workplaces where they're overlooked, or on social peripheries where they never quite belong. It's not that they don't want more. It's that more feels wrong in a way that's hard to explain. The nervous system perceives it as danger. Change feels like exposure. Their life has been organized around not being chosen, truly choosing themselves, not just saying the words but making meaningful choices that reflect a different self-view means dismantling something that has provided support for a long time. That's serious work. It doesn't happen through motivation alone. It doesn't respond to willpower. It requires sustained, often professionally supported effort over time. But it begins with understanding that this pattern isn't who you are. It's what has developed in response to experiences you couldn't control or handle differently at the time. You built it to survive, and it served its purpose. Now, it's no longer the most helpful thing you know how to do. Not every rejection is just painful to endure. Some rejections are actually helpful, providing information. Some rejections save you from investing more of yourself into something that was never meant to hold you. The job that didn't call back in 8 months, you might have been working for someone who would have made you miserable. The person who walked away, they weren't capable of giving you what you needed. You would have kept reshaping yourself, trying to close a gap that wasn't possible to close. The group that excluded you belonging there would have required you to be a smaller version of yourself forever. You can't see this while the alarm is ringing. You're not supposed to. Your brain is in damage control mode. But later, when the cortisol drops, when the replay slows down, when you can think again, there's often a signal beneath the pain. Not here, not this, not them, not as punishment, as guidance. The hardest but most helpful way to see rejection is this. It shows you where you don't fit. And understanding where you don't fit, if you learn to see it as information, rather than a verdict, can eventually lead you to where you do fit. That doesn't make the pain smaller in the moment. It changes what it means after the moment passes. Rejection feels like physical pain, because it is physical pain. Your brain makes no distinction between the two. It was built in an era when belonging meant survival, and that wiring runs deeper than logic, deeper than self-talk, deeper than, you need to toughen up. The shame spiral is real. The replay loop is real. The cognitive decline that follows rejection is real. The behavioral patterns that develop from repeated rejection are real, self-perpetuating, and most are completely invisible while they happen. None of this means you're broken. It means you're human running ancient threat detection software in a world it wasn't built for, making the best decisions you can with temporarily compromised hardware. The goal isn't to stop feeling rejection. It's to stop letting it define your story. To stop letting one verdict become a permanent judgment of everything you are. To notice when the pain shifts from, "I don't fit here," to, "I don't fit anywhere," and to refuse that shift. You weren't made to be chosen by everyone. You were made to find places where the fit is real, where you don't have to hollow yourself out to belong, where showing up as what you really are is enough. This means walking through rejection, not around it. Every time you do and stay standing, even barely or shaking, you prove something to your nervous system. Not that rejection doesn't hurt. Not that it isn't fatal. Here's what I want you to reflect on. The rejection that still lives in your chest, the one you replay, and the one that quietly influences how you move through the world. What did it convince you about yourself? And is that the truth? Or is that your brain running worst-case scenarios on a wound it was never meant to heal alone? If this resonated deeply, subscribe. Every week, we explore this kind of depth, not just surface-level explanations, but the actual mechanics beneath. I'll see you there.